So some pretty mixed views there in Edinburgh. Well, to just discuss all this and more, I'm joined in the studio now by the First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon. Thank you for being with us this morning. So back in 2014, we were all told that the independence referendum was a once-in-a-generation event. So I'm a little bit confused. Just how long do you think a generation is?
I think that's a reasonable question. Of course, Brexit changed everything in 2016, and if we cast our minds back to the 2014 referendum, what we were also told by those campaigning against independence at that time was that a yes vote would jeopardise our place in the European Union and only a no vote would secure it. So the 2016 vote on the EU really was a material change in circumstances. The future of the UK looks very different today than it did 2 years ago. And my argument is quite a simple one. We know as a result of the Brexit vote, change is coming for Scotland. We can't avoid that change now. The question is, what kind of change do we want, and shouldn't we have the right to choose that? Do we want to go down the hard Brexit path, or do we want to choose independence so that we can create a genuine partnership of equals across the British Isles, but also secure our relationship with Europe? So it's about choice. It's about saying to people the future of Scotland really should be decided by Scotland, not decided for us by Westminster governments.
You see, you mount your whole argument on the fact that there's been a change in circumstances because of Brexit. That was in page 23 of your referendum. But at the same time, it does feel a little bit like you're trying to catch people out with the small print. But because what you have also been saying very strongly is that you won't have another referendum until it's clear the majority of Scottish people want it. I'm just going to look, for example, at what you said when you were launching your manifesto in 2016, setting the date for a referendum before a majority of the Scottish people have been persuaded independence is the best future for our country is the wrong way round. And there hasn't been a single poll that shows that's the case. That's changed.
Maybe I'm being old-fashioned here. I don't think manifestos are small print. The manifesto that I was elected on as First Minister, incidentally, with a higher share of the vote across Scottish constituencies of any party in the history of the Scottish Parliament, is really important. And what it said, and you've quoted both of those bits of the manifesto at me, but what it said was the Scottish Parliament should have a right to have another referendum if there is a significant change in opinion or if there is a material change in circumstances. But I'm also talking about the emphasis that you chose to make when you were standing on the stage. It's the same emphasis that you made, for example, when launching the manifesto and also in those Holyrood TV debates as well. My manifesto speaks for itself, and anybody can go and look at the terms of the manifesto I was elected on, and that is, you know, yes, we said if there was a material shift in opinion or, and the word or was there, if there is a material change in circumstances, and expressly it said, such as Scotland being taken out of the EU against our will. And we were elected fairly overwhelmingly on the strength of that manifesto. But look, I'm making an argument. Everybody knows I support independence. So I don't think I'm telling you anything you don't know. But
no, this is about state secrets there.
No exclusive for you here. But this is about choice. And, you know, if people in Scotland decide that hard Brexit, the way Theresa May wants to take the UK, is what Scotland wants, that's one thing.
But there's having no sign the Scottish people want that choice, is there?
Well, I would actually suggest that there is every sign. I mean, there's been a slew of opinion polls over the past week. You know, there was one showing that a majority of people did think if the Scottish Government said there should be a referendum, then the UK Government should not stand in the way.
But there's been no one saying that the majority of Scottish people want independence, which is what you were talking about. When you launch your manifesto.
I've set out what my manifesto says, and you know, anybody can. They don't have to just listen to me. You can go and check that. And the mandate for the choice I'm seeking to give people now is very clear. It's beyond any shadow of a doubt. But on the question of public opinion, I guess what I'm saying is it should be for people to choose, because we know that Brexit means change now is inevitable. It's about what kind of change do we want and who gets to decide that. If a referendum on independence was to be denied, then effectively the future of Scotland has not been decided by us, it's been decided for us. Now, I should say I don't propose a referendum now. I don't think it would be right to put that choice to the people of Scotland before the terms of Brexit were clearer, much, much clearer than they are now. But I also think it would be fair for people in Scotland, once the terms are clear, to have that choice before it's too late to choose a different course.
Let's talk about that timetable, shall we? Because Theresa May has made it pretty clear that she doesn't accept the timetable you've put on the table, which is by autumn 2018.
No, it's not. It's the earliest autumn 2018.
The earliest autumn 2018. Would you accept her timetable, which is after Brexit?
I don't know what her timetable is. I mean, after Brexit could be from now to never, by definition.
But shall we say, after the Brexit negotiations, after the UK has left the EU, would you then be happy to have a referendum then?
I guess that depends on what that time frame then looks like. I've said, and I said it,
then.
Well, let me just set out my position clearly. I said yesterday, if Theresa May's concern is timing, then within reason, I'm happy to have that discussion. I've trying to find some consensus here. We both say not now, so we agree on that. I've set out the time frame that I think would be fair and reasonable. She says she doesn't agree with that, so I think it's therefore for her to say what time frame she thinks would be reasonable, and then let's have that discussion. I'm perfectly happy to have that discussion.
So would 2020 be okay?
No, that takes to the second point I was going to make. I don't think it would be fair for Scotland to have a delay so that it meant that Scotland was taken out of the EU, a long period of time was allowed to elapse, making it much harder then for Scotland, even if it wanted to negotiate a different relationship with Europe. That's why I talk about this, before it's too late for us to choose a different course. So, I've tried very, very hard to compromise with Theresa May over the past number of months. I mean, what viewers outside of Scotland might not be aware of is that we actually put forward a proposal that would have accepted Scotland staying in the UK, coming out of the EU, but protecting our place within the single market, proposing new powers for the Scottish Parliament to try to protect Scotland's interests in a post-Brexit landscape. So we've tried very hard to compromise, and we've met so far with a UK government that's been very intransigent and not willing to enter into that discussion.
Part of Theresa May's concern, of course, will be that this is not the right thing to be hanging over those crucial negotiations. Now, I understand, of course, that you represent people in Scotland. Do you not care at all about the instability about other people in the UK, people from England, Wales and Northern Ireland?
Care. I care deeply. I didn't want the UK to be in this position at all. I want the UK to get a good deal from Europe, because that, apart from being in the best interests of people in other parts of the UK, that's also the best interests of Scotland.
But this could be a distraction from that deal.
But I cannot, and I'm not alone here, I cannot simply pretend that I don't have real fears that Theresa May will not get a good deal. She may get a bad deal or no deal, and that even a good deal will be significantly worse than membership of the single market. So this comes to the choice I had to make. I can, choose to let Scotland simply drift through the next 2 years, crossing my fingers, hoping for the best while fearing the worst, or I can try to set out a plan for Scotland now that gives, at the right time, the people of Scotland a choice. And I think it's right to plan to give people in Scotland the choice.
OK, well, let's talk about that plan, shall we? An independent Scotland, in your mind, would you be looking to join the EU as a full member state? You would?
That's long-standing SNP policy.
Even though it's so complicated in order to get to that application. Well, and all you need is one member state to say, no, that's no good, such as Spain, their own issues with separatists, and you'd be at the back of the queue, wouldn't you? Because there is no waiting list.
There is no queue to join the European Union, and we've had several voices over recent times saying that if Scotland wanted to be in the EU, there would be a very open, warm reception for that. Now, I accept that we're in changed circumstances. In 2014, when I was arguing the case for independence, the UK was very firmly in the EU. The UK is now going to be coming out of the EU. So we have to, and set out very clearly to people in Scotland before asking them to make this choice, the route and the process that we would take to transition from where we are now to being in a relationship with Europe that was right for Scotland. So that's detail that requires to be set out. But I do believe it's right for Scotland to remain within that European family of nations, not instead of trading across the UK, but in addition to that, the single market is massively important. It's massively important to the UK economy. It's very important to the Scottish economy. Geographically, we are, on the periphery of Europe. It's really important to be in the single market. It's important for investment and for jobs, to, protect the rights of ourselves to follow careers or jobs in other European countries and vice versa. It's important for all of these reasons. So yes, I do think that is important. It's also what people in Scotland voted for.
You say the single market is important. Of course it is important. But 63% of Scottish trade is with the rest of the UK, and that compares to just 16% with the EU. I mean, the real economic risk would be leaving.
You're asking me very fair questions, and I'll come on to that directly in a second, but I absolutely accept the scrutiny of these positions, because if you think about the Brexit vote, people were asked to vote with no detail whatsoever. 9 months on, it's still Brexit means Brexit is about as much detail as we've got.
I mean, it's a leap into the dark, a bit like the other referendum, isn't it?
I'm determined that it wouldn't be. It would be an informed choice, which is why I say the choice should happen when the terms of Brexit are clear, and also the obligation is on me and those arguing for independence to put forward the detail on what independence looks like. But to come back to your question, because I wasn't trying to dodge it, the trade with the UK, trade with the rest of the UK is important for Scotland, vitally important for Scotland. It's important for the rest of the UK to trade with Scotland. I'm not proposing staying in the single market instead of that trade. And for those who say, but it would be impossible to trade, an independent Scotland to trade with the UK, I'd make 2 points. We've got a UK government saying that it's going to freely trade with every country in the world. It would be a bit odd if that excluded an independent Scotland. But secondly, the Prime Minister, rightly I should say, I absolutely agree with the comments she makes in this regard, is saying right now to the Republic of Ireland that the UK being out of the EU and the Republic of Ireland being in it does not necessitate a hard border between Ireland and the UK, and would not put in place barriers to trade. I simply make the point that it's not credible for the UK government to say that to Ireland, an independent country in the EU, and to somehow pretend that the situation would be different for an independent Scotland.
So what currency then would an independent Scotland have?
We're doing a piece of work looking at this just now. Obviously in 2014 we proposed using the pound within a currency union. The starting point of our consideration is that Scotland would use the pound. It's our currency, it's a fully tradable international currency. But as I'm sure you know, I have a growth commission right now looking at a plan for the economic future of Scotland, but also looking in detail at currency options for Scotland.
So you don't know then? Well, you're calling for a referendum when you're not sure what currency you'd use?
That commission hasn't concluded its work yet, I'm being perfectly frank. Look, a referendum at the earliest is going to be 18 months from now. I absolutely accept, well in advance of that, not just in currency, but on the economic plan, on some of the questions you're asking me on Europe, we will set out a very clear proposition. But I think it's right, given the changed circumstances of Brexit, that we do very serious work before we come to putting that proposition forward. So that work hasn't concluded yet. I said in my speech to the SNP conference yesterday, it will conclude over the next few months, and at that point we will publish its conclusions for public scrutiny and debate. And people, I feel, few people have said, commentators have said that those of us arguing for independence next time round would try to sort of emulate the Leave campaign by putting slogans on the side of a bus and giving no detail. I would not want the future of my country to be decided on that basis. I want people in Scotland to have an informed choice, and that means informed about the implications of Brexit, but also informed about the implications of independence.
And yet you can't say what currency they would use. I mean, surely that would be something you should work out before calling for the referendum and before going to the Scottish Parliament.
A referendum, as we've just been talking about, is at the earliest 18 months away. I'm not asking people to vote today or tomorrow or next week or next month. But what I've said is we're doing detailed work. The starting point of our consideration is that Scotland uses the pound. It's our currency as much as it is the currency of anywhere else. But it's right, we're in very changed circumstances. Brexit changes lots and lots of things, not just for Scotland, but for the UK. So I think people should take some assurance from the fact that we're doing very detailed work on all of these questions, and well in advance of being asked to make a choice, there will be a proposition put forward for people that allow them to make that choice in a very informed way.
Let's talk about the economic realities, because Scotland has a £15 billion deficit. Now, as a percentage of GDP, that is higher than any other EU member state, including Greece. Your economy is growing at a third of the speed of the rest of the United Kingdom. Oil revenues in the last 2 years have fallen by 97%. Be frank. Can Scotland really afford to become an independent country?
Well, I would actually look at that, and perhaps some people would look at that and say, can Scotland afford not to be? Because that deficit, and I want to, because again, these are all absolutely legitimate questions. That deficit is one that has been created on, to use shorthand, Westminster's watch. That's not a feature of life in an independent Scotland. That's what's happened with Scotland as part of the UK.
But you've been in government. You need to take some responsibility for it as well, don't you?
We're not responsible for macroeconomic policy in the Scottish Parliament. I wish we were. We might not be in that position. And of course, the UK and most countries have a deficit, and the UK's got, £1.7 trillion of debt, which is separate to deficit. Obviously, but that's my first point. The second point, and this I think is the more fundamental point, That deficit exists whether we're independent or not, which means it has to be dealt with whether we're independent or not. The question there, therefore, for Scotland is, are we better to allow Westminster to keep making the same mistakes that created that deficit in the first place, or are we better to set out an economic plan about how we use the greater economic powers of independence to grow our economy, to encourage more people to come to Scotland, which, if we're in the single market and the UK is not, I suspect would be a bit of a magnet for investment, to work out a plan to get to a more sustainable and stronger economic future. And that's the fundamental choice. The deficit can't be magicked away, whatever our constitutional future. It's what constitutional arrangements give us the best ability to deal with that situation.
So you blame Westminster, but at the same time, you get a £26 billion block grant from Westminster as well,
which has been, that's the way we're funded, which has been, if you take from the moment the Tories came to power in 2010 to the end of this decade, that block grant will reduce by 10% in real terms. So Scotland's not independent. And again, this will be a choice.
But you want to reduce it to nothing.
Well, no, because that money goes from Scotland to Westminster and comes back again. So anyway, we're getting overly technical here. The point I'm making is that if Scotland doesn't become independent, and that's a choice for people in Scotland, then what we're facing are continued cuts to our block grant. We're facing more years of austerity. We're facing an impact from the UK leaving the single market that, is estimated to, cost thousands of jobs in Scotland and to reduce our budget even further. So this is a choice not between some, certain future with no difficulties with the UK and lots of uncertainty and difficulties with independence. This is about a future where there are big challenges for Scotland and the UK. How do we best equip ourselves to meet those challenges? And I think staying within the world's biggest single market, giving ourselves the ability to work towards a more sustainable economic future is far better than allowing ourselves to be taken out of that single market by the UK and facing the economics of austerity for more years, just as we have over the past number of years.
There is an argument, isn't there, that talking about an independence referendum is quite convenient for you because it allows you to distract from your domestic record of the SNP. And let's just look at that record for a second. Education standards are slipping. A record number of nations are now doing better than Scotland in terms of that. Life expectancy, 2 years less in the UK. The number of children in poverty is up. The number of pensioners in poverty is up. I mean, it's a welcome diversion, isn't it, from looking at the record of the SNP?
Just very briefly, I don't think you can separate the health of our NHS and education, which is affected by overall public spending and budgets, from these big decisions about whether we're in or out of the single market or independent or not. But
you can't blame it all on Westminster or external forces.
I was about to come on to these. I'm the First Minister. I take responsibility for all of these things. But I was just going to counter some of these. We saw poverty in Scotland and the UK increasing last week, largely down to welfare changes from Westminster. On education, we've got a massive programme of work underway right now to raise standards, to close the attainment gap. We are now seeing improvements in terms of children from more deprived backgrounds doing better in school, going to university. Take the health service, for example. Our accident and emergency departments, under real pressure, in common with others across the UK, are performing 13 percentage points better than accident and emergency departments in England. 90.8% of people in Scotland seen within 4 hours, 77% in England. So on many of these judgments, we're doing better here in Scotland under the Scottish Government than policy south of the border. So I take those responsibilities very, very seriously. But I take my wider responsibilities as First Minister to try to protect Scotland's interests in the bigger picture, if you like, so that we can continue to invest in health and education and continue to work towards the improvements that all of us want to see.
If you're so committed to improving things such as education, why did you only mention it once in your speech yesterday when you mentioned independence?
We've got
13 times?
a massive programme of work underway in education right now. So we're in the process of introducing standardised assessments. We've just announced a £120 million pupil equity fund, putting resources directly into the hands of head teachers. We've got a governance review of education underway. What I did talk about in my speech yesterday was the doubling of childcare provision over this Parliament and our intention to pay childcare staff who work in our nurseries, the living wage, so we can attract more people into that profession, value that work, because we know that many of the inequities in education later in a child's education start before they even start school. We've put such an emphasis on increasing early years and childcare provision, and that was one of the key announcements in my speech yesterday, as was investment in mental health. So we're going to increase the access to mental health professionals, not just in our hospitals but in our prisons and police cells. Also announcing investment in my speech yesterday around digital skills. So, you know, you can't just, I know you don't, now that I'm talking about all the things I did announce in my speech yesterday, you want to stop. These were all in my speech yesterday. They're all vital. But all of these things are at risk if we allow ourselves to be taken down that hard Brexit path that is going to be so damaging for our economy and our society.
Now, I'm really interested in this question because you are clearly a formidable politician. You've devoted your life to independence. You've built your reputation over many years. This is a huge personal risk for you, isn't it, the second referendum? If you fail, then just like David Cameron, this could be all you're remembered for.
I just take a simple view. I'm not in politics to, you know, judge everything and what it means for my own individual career.
But you must feel that pressure slightly.
Look, any politician worth their salt, sorry, Sunday morning, that doesn't feel the pressure of the job shouldn't be in that job. So I feel the pressure. I feel far more pressure to make sure we've got a really well-performing health service and to fulfil the commitment I've given around education. These are the things that matter
and what
to
was
me.
What was the formative thing in Nicola Sturgeon's life that meant you were so committed to an independent Scotland?
I grew up when Margaret Thatcher was Prime Minister in a part of Scotland, in common with many communities across England and Wales as well, that, you know, was really damaged because of her industrial policy, because of her, you know, approach to many policies. So I grew up with people who, you know, had a sense of hopelessness. Unemployment was very high. And one of the things when I was very young that seemed wrong to me was that all of these policies were being imposed on Scotland when most of the vast majority of people in Scotland had never voted for Margaret Thatcher's party. So my politics are driven by social justice and building a better country. Independence for me is not the end in itself. It's the means to an end. It's the means to trying to build a better Scotland.
So will you stand down then if you lose this referendum?
You know, I'm not planning to lose. I'm planning to give people in Scotland a choice, and I'm planning to try to persuade them to make what I consider to be the right choice. And, you know, after we've had it, I'll be perfectly happy to come back and answer those questions, but it's not a question that I'm going to engage with right now.
I was hoping you would, but
I know
never mind.
you were, but, you know,
not quite an answer.
You know
there.
better.
Nicola Sturgeon, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.